Hi, I'm Kaytlin Hall. I'm a financial advisor here at Gerber Kawasaki. And today we have Natasha Carroll-Ferrari with us, who is an estate planning attorney in Los Angeles. Natasha, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So, Los Angeles is our home, and our hearts are with everyone affected by the recent devastation. So many friends, neighbors, clients, and loved ones are facing unimaginable loss right now, and we stand with them in love and support. The city is strong, and together we will rebuild and heal. As part of the presentation, ensuring your financial and estate planning needs are in order can provide peace of mind during uncertain times, whether it's fire, earthquakes, or any other emergency. So, today we want to talk about estate planning and financial planning during and after an emergency, what to put in your to go bag, and some resources to help you stay organized and prepared as possible. We have to give a little disclaimer here, and that this is not legal advice, and this content is general information. It should not be used in lieu of speaking with an attorney or a financial professional. All right, so let's get started. Natasha, what are usually the first things people do after a disaster?
So I think the first thing that usually comes up is that people want to know what they should do with lost documents. And this is probably one of the most frequently asked questions, even before anything happens. The most important thing in recovering is recovering your estate planning documents. And there's a few things to think about with estate planning documents. And that by estate planning documents, I'm sort of using the phrase for your will, your trust, a financial power of attorney, which is sometimes called a durable power of attorney, your healthcare power of attorney, which is also called an advanced healthcare directive. But your original hard copy documents are the most important documents. So scans, your online cloud storage, none of that is really ideal. And so that becomes really important when we're talking about these lost documents.
So, where should you keep these documents? Like, if the cloud and, you know, like I guess a USB thing are not the best options, like where should you keep them?
Yeah. So ideally, I actually tell people to keep their documents in their to go bags. And that's where I have mine. It's ready to go. And I don't have water in my to go bag, but I do have my estate plan in it. Most attorneys draft documents that don't include a social security number or other personal, financial information. So having it somewhere where you can grab it and go is really important. Some people ask me about doing things in fireproof safes or in
I
safe
was
deposit boxes or something exactly like that. And I think a couple things with that. The first is that we learned in the LA fires that those fireproof safes are not, in fact, fireproof.
Mm.
Some of the fireproof safes were destroyed, and some of the fireproof safes were fine, but all the documents inside of them turned to ash. So that was not super helpful. The second thing is that even if there's not a fire situation, you really want to have your documents somewhere where people can access them. So, in that kind of worst case scenario where you are incapacitated in the hospital, something like that, you want people to be able to get to your documents. You don't want them to have to try to break into a safe or otherwise have to get a court order to get into, a safe deposit box. And I think part of that is remembering what the purpose of the estate planning documents are, and that's to make sure that you're protecting yourself and that you can be cared for in an emergency situation when you are incapacitated. So a lot of people are thinking about estate planning documents that, well, if you die, then you're not there and they can figure it out. But actually, it's really, really important for incapacity purposes, and that's a lot of what we saw in terms of the fires was people who maybe needed oxygen or needed certain short-term services, and it would be helpful to have those documents handy.
So, what happens if you just don't have the documents, or like you have to get out and the documents are lost? Like,
Yeah.
are you out of luck? What happens now?
Yeah. So there's a couple different levels to that. The first thing is that I want to reassure people that if you have estate planning documents and something happens and you need to go to the hospital or you have some other kind of emergency, the digital versions of your documents should work. There are some caveats to that. There are some financial institutions that may give you a hard time, but in theory, they should work with some added protections. So, the first thing that I suggest is reach out to your attorney because there are certain affidavits that your attorney can have you sign if there is a lost document, that the original can kind of, that the copy and the affidavit can work together. The question often is whether a bank is going to accept something like that. So many times it's really just, the easiest thing to do is just execute new documents. So with my clients, I have a handful who lost their homes and lost their estate planning documents, and what I have said to them is, this is not something you need to take care of this minute. When you have the time and the space, let's execute new documents. But if something happens to them between now and then, they do have something in place. It may just require me to write an affidavit saying that, yes, these were the original documents and that they were destroyed in the fire. So there's just an extra level that is required.
So it's not like it's all lost and you have to start all over again. There is still
No. Yeah.
something out there. And then this is still on the same topic of like living trust, but there's been, it seems like a lot of confusion about like living trust and insurance claims. Like, what, can you explain that and what's going on
Yeah.
there? Because I'm confused.
Yes. The one of the most frequently asked questions that I've received since the fires all happened is, do I need to add my living trust as an insured party to my homeowner's insurance policy? And the short answer is yes. You should do that. Partly because there's really no reason not to. It's the living trust uses your social security number, and your insurance policy also uses your social security number. So, in theory, this shouldn't make any difference for an insurance company. Um, but some insurance companies are trying to deny claims on the basis that the property is held in a living trust. Sometimes this is just going to be bad faith on the part of the insurance company, but it's really not worth taking that risk. So I would say call your insurance company, add your trust as an insured party. Do not replace your names. So that's really important. So you want to make sure that you are on the insurance policy and your living trust is also an additional insured. Right now, there's a moratorium in many of in most of the Los Angeles area, that insurance companies can't pull your insurance coverage right now. And so now is a great time to call them and add your living trust, because they can't pull your insurance. So I don't think that that's going to stand in terms of the long term, but I do think that there's no harm in calling and just adding your trust.
So it's kind of like a joint owner, I guess, in a sense. Like it's just somebody else that's sort of on your insurance policy.
Sort of. It doesn't.
Okay.
This is that. Yes, we'll go with yes on that.
Okay, so close enough, close enough.
Close enough.
Okay, so that's really helpful because that area was confusing, and I know people have had a lot of questions about how to, what to do with their insurance, especially if their home is in a living trust.
I
Can you
will
tell me
say,
a little bit.
actually, sorry.
Oh, no.
I will say that everybody who I've talked to who has called to add their living trust as an insured, it has taken 2 minutes or less.
Oh,
So
that's easy.
it has been an extremely easy process. The insurance companies know that you're calling for this. They know how to do it. They know, what to do. So this is not something that you're going to call and they're going to say, oh, what? It's a fairly easy thing to do. So
Oh, that's good. Yeah, sometimes you
yes,
just don't do things if they're daunting, so, nice to know that this should not be one of those things.
exactly.
Um, can you tell us a little bit more about, if you're not able to take care of things on your own?
Yeah.
Like, I know there was a lot
Um,
of people who are older, right, who probably need a little bit of extra support during these disasters. What do they do? What can you do?
the thing that I suggest is just making sure that, if you do have an estate plan and if you don't have an estate plan, in both of those kind of contexts, you really would just want to make sure that you've got a successor in all of these contexts. So that might mean having a successor trustee to your trust so that they can jump in if you are incapacitated or unable or unwilling to manage your own affairs. And sometimes that's just a matter of changing the language that's in the trust or updating it so that you have somebody else on there. But also make sure that certain investment accounts or assets may let you have a trusted contact in there. And it can be really important to add your successor trustees as a trusted contact so that if they do need to jump in, the amount of documentation and paperwork and all of that is sort of decreased in that kind of worrisome time, I would say.
Yeah,
So
I have seen that trusted, contact. We have those on a lot of the accounts that we manage here, and, not everyone always chooses to name somebody, but, that is an option that I actually see a lot.
yeah.
So that makes sense. Um, and then I think I'll jump into some of the financial planning, right? Or did we I think we got, yeah, we got everything I think for the estate planning part, right?
Yeah.
So maybe we can jump
Well,
into some of the
I
financial
have
planning.
questions for you because we were just talking
Okay.
about insurance and we're talking
Yes.
about, adding your trust as an insured party. But there's a lot of stuff with insurance, and that has come up a ton. And the first one that I want to ask you about actually is about fire insurance. So I'm sorry because I know that that is it's a loaded topic at the moment. But can you tell me a little bit about fire insurance from your perspective, from a planning side of
Sure.
things?
Yeah, so obviously everyone's talking about fire insurance and, then we have mudslides and all of this, but with fire insurance, it's something extra. It's not part of your, homeowner's insurance. This is like an extra policy that you do have to add. It does cover, in most cases, it covers repairs and rebuilding after fire damage, and it can pay for personal property loss, depending on the policy. And it may even cover temporary living expenses. So if you cannot live in your home and you need to rent someplace else, it could help cover those expenses, whether it's a set dollar amount or what you currently pay it. Again, it will kind of depend on your policy. So people who have these in place are in, much better shape than if they're paying, a mortgage, then also having to pay rent at a new place right now, because that can get quite expensive. There are some limitations, it may not cover the full cost of rebuilding, and wildfire prone areas may be more expensive, or even have limited availability. So that's really tricky, and it probably will get trickier in LA. And then some policies have exclusions or high deductions, but those are just some of the weights that you have to see if it's worth it or not worth it, or if that's an area that you want to live in. But it seems like the people who have the fire insurance right now are not as panicked, I guess, or not as panicked financially about what they're going to do and where they're going to live.
Yeah, I can see how that would make a really big difference. The thing that you started out talking about at the beginning of that is you mentioned mudslides because we have
Yeah.
now had our third day of rain since May. And that makes me think about flood insurance. So,
Yeah.
what can you tell us about flood insurance?
I know those poor homes that maybe made it through the fires and then aren't making it through the mud. It's just, feels like one disaster after another, but that does happen in, the fire prone areas. There are mudslides afterwards. That's nothing new for, California, but same thing. Flood insurance is something extra. It's not added, it's not included in your original homeowner's policy. But flooding can result from anything. That can be hurricanes, which we don't have in California, but or usually we don't, but we, typically don't have in California. But flooding can be caused from hurricane, or flood insurance can cover hurricanes, heavy rains, overflowing bodies of water. So again, standard homeowners insurance doesn't cover this damage. So a separate flood insurance policy is necessary. Um, this again pays for the structural damage, foundation, walls, electrical, plumbing, that those type of expenses that may come up with flooding, and then personal belongings, furniture, electronics, all of those things that can also be damaged within the flood. And then there are some federal options, but those can be tricky too. And private insurers also offer flood insurance. So we have to look into that if that's something that you're interested in, and make sure that you have the right coverage. Sometimes there's caps, there are exclusions. Like basements or temporary housing may not be covered. And then gradual water damage, that's not really considered a flood. So there are some exclusions and limitations for the flood insurance too.
That makes sense. Were you going to say something else about it?
Nope, I was just gonna say, then the last thing that we have to look forward to in California, um, earthquakes.
Yeah.
And we've all kind of lived through our fair share of earthquakes. Some we can remember, some maybe we can't. I have a younger sister who slept through the big Northridge earthquake, but I know not everyone is so lucky and gets to feel them. But yeah, again, earthquakes are a separate insurance policy or a rider that you add to your homeowner's insurance, so it's not included in the in your standard homeowner's policy. Structural damage, same thing. So rebuilding costs after an earthquake or personal property can also be included in here. Loss of use. So, some policies will offer you like living expenses again if your home is uninhabitable to live somewhere else. Typically, high deductibles. It does have exclusion. So, if you have a fire or water damage due to an earthquake, you have to have fire and flood insurance. Like the insurance coverage is only due to the insurance part, or I'm sorry, it's only due to the
Earthquake.
earthquake part of the damage. So fire damage caused by an earthquake isn't covered. Homeowners typically have to have both. So it gets tricky, and then it's one of the reasons why we're talking about buying a home and the financial obligations behind it, that you do have to be prepared for all of these things and make sure that you have the right coverage on such a large asset like your home. Um, Landslides and sinkholes, if earthquake triggers a landslide, it may not be covered, and then man-made earthquakes are also typically not covered. So that's our uh, our earthquake insurance.
I didn't mean to roll my eyes at all of the different things, but I feel like it's so often that you feel like insurance companies are trying to kind of get out of, whatever area, but you can see how everything kind of fits together and how some of that can be really important.
Yeah.
Um, did you want to talk about self-insurance?
Yeah, self-insurance is tricky. Self-insurance is basically, instead of paying the premiums yourself, you set aside a designated amount of money to kind of cover these expenses in case an emergency does happen.
Mhm.
Um, this typically works best if you have significant savings, and you're willing to take that risk. So it's typically not something I recommend for clients because, as we know, this can be quite expensive to rebuild and come up with these expenses yourself. And I want to talk about the rebuild process and what that actually means and the cost. But I guess self-insurance is an option, but you really need a lot of money saved, and that money just would have to be designated for the insurance bucket. It couldn't be your 401k that you would use in case of an emergency, because that's not what that would work for. So yeah, typically I don't recommend that.
In referring to the 401k, and I do want to talk about the rebuilding stuff with you as well,
Yeah.
but what do you say to somebody who is planning to use their home as their
Mm.
retirement plan? Like, what?
Yeah, I've heard that a lot. There's a lot of people in LA specifically who bought homes in the 80s or 90s or maybe even before, and they have huge gains. And I'll sell my home in California and then move out of state to retire, and I'll be able to use the proceeds of my home. That's what I hear a lot. Um, I don't want to say what happens now, but kind of what happens now, right? Like that home that you had, if it was a $4 million home in Pacific Palisades and it's gone now, that's really, really devastating for your retirement planning. It completely changes, what you're looking for, what you're able to do. Um, so I think, you have to, diversify, right? You can't have all your eggs in one basket. You can't have your whole retirement plan be in your house. Maybe it could be a portion of the retirement assets, but if you had a $4 million house and now there's nothing there and the land's worth 2 million, maybe, that's half of your retirement savings are gone. So it's really scary, and my heart does hurt for those people who have that plan. But it's really important to diversify, your financial assets, whether it's in real estate or investments.
Should we talk a little bit about rebuilding?
Yes, I think that's a great idea.
Okay.
We know that's probably gonna take some time, I guess, is the first thing to start with, right? Like, nothing's happening today. Homes aren't being rebuilt right now. Did a little bit of digging to see actually how much, like, it would cost to rebuild, and so these are
Mhm.
estimates, but typically it's about $300 to $600 a square foot to rebuild. So this does depend on, factors like where you live, the area, maybe um, the house, right? Like, are you going for a modern house, or are you going for, a green energy type of house, but somewhere between $300 and $600 a square foot. Um, Another big thing is gonna be contractor availability. If
Mm.
there are thousands of homes that need to be rebuilt, and then you have businesses, plus just the other maintenance that other people have in the area, homes get old and they need new roofs. The demand for these construction services could lead to delay in some rebuilding efforts or potentially maybe make the cost higher. Um, and then same thing, supply chain disruptions. If everyone's looking for, you know, materials to rebuild their home and we just can't get enough, like it will just take longer because we're not used to such a large demand of, rebuilding entire neighborhoods. And then, like we were talking about earlier, insurance delays. If you're not getting your insurance check, it's going to be a lot harder to pay for, those rebuilds, unless you're able to front the money yourself, which most people can't. Um, and then, so one question that kind of some of I've heard a little bit of. So if you're rebuilding, do you need to update your estate plan? Like, can you leave it? What do you do?
Yeah, so usually with some exceptions, usually what is in the living trust is the lot. So as long as you are rebuilding on that lot, then the lot is in the name of your living trust, then there's really nothing you should do. In general, I don't want to speak to everything because that would get me into legal trouble, but generally your living trust is not asset dependent. It is, it is a structure by which all of your assets are managed and distributed. But it is not asset dependent, meaning that a change in your assets does not require you to update your estate plan. So if you are rebuilding on the same lot, you don't need to do anything. If I know we may talk about relocating and things like that. If you move to some other place, as long as you acquire the new location in the name of your living trust, then there's nothing for you to do with your documents either.
I was just going to ask that. So if you stay in California, or you stay in LA area, but you're just not living in the same city, you're relocating, but you don't really need to update anything as long as you purchase the new home in the name of your living trust.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
And I think that's another, financial planning question is relocating. Do you rebalance? Or I'm sorry, do you rebalance? Do you relocate? Do you rebuild? And I think this is a personal question too that a lot of people have to come up with. Balancing your long term goals with your immediate needs. Unfortunately, we know several people who have small children and they lost their school and they lost their homes, so the option to, wait 5 years to rebuild, or whatever it might be, whether it's a school that's in a temporary location that's not ideal, they have really no choice, I think, right now, but to relocate. And then same thing for people who are retired. If you're in your 70s and 80s and you did lose your home, waiting 5 to 10 years to build something new may not be ideal or may not be possible. So I think we are probably going to see some people relocating, whether that means whether they were renting or buying, but if they take their insurance, proceeds and then they do leave. But I have heard this too, that, they've had their home, their kids are grown up, they don't need that big home anymore. Now their kids live out of state. So I don't want to say take the money and run, but a little bit, right? Like sell the property, take the insurance proceeds, and then move out of state where it's cheaper, maybe where their grandchildren are. What has to happen in that case for an estate plan?
Yeah. Unfortunately, estate planning laws are state to state. And so that means that the law that applies is the law of the state where you reside at the time that you pass away, is sort of what happens. So if you are residing in another state, if you need to move, then unfortunately, it may mean updating your estate planning documents with a new attorney. What I usually ask my clients to do is to let me know, because if I can help facilitate that conversation at all, then I like to do that. So if they're moving to a state where I might already know an attorney there, then I can put them in contact. Or if I don't, or if they don't want to work with the person I know, that's totally fine. But perhaps having a conversation that includes me as their, current or former estate planning attorney, that can sometimes bridge it a little bit easier. But unfortunately, it does mean redoing most of your documents in another state.
And then what would happen, I actually have a few clients who are in this situation too. They've maybe already been paid part of their insurance proceeds, and they know they're not rebuilding for a couple of years. It's gonna take a long time, but they're interested in buying a house out of state, like, they have a family member that lives out of state. They still reside in California, but they're buying a house in another state. Are there what happens there? Is that how does that work with, the estate plan?
Yeah. So typically, if they are still residing in California, that's their plan, then they just want to make sure that they, again, purchase that house or that property in the name of their California trust. So,
Okay.
and similarly, if you are starting out and you're just doing your estate plan now and you own a property in another state, then I help that client get those assets from the other state into the name of the California trust as well, because it's really important for streamlining to make sure that that happens. So either
Mm.
way, you want to make sure that you have that property in the name of the trust, whether it's in California or out of California, unless you are leaving the state for good.
Love that. Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Um, and, I think a lot of that also probably goes into, like, losses, right? Like, whether it's worth it to stay
Yeah.
here or not. Um, and, people have questions about losses and taxes. This is confusing. So, and I really, really suggest speaking with the CPA about tax questions. I'm not a tax expert. With that said, I think you can probably make a few assumptions about, wildlife, or I'm sorry, wildfire related losses. But, if the fire is a federally declared disaster, then generally you can deduct some things, like uninsured or unreimbursed property losses, cleanup and repair costs, maybe temporary housing, loss of valuable records, photos. But again, I think this is really something that you need to talk to a CPA about, because this is tax related, and I am not a tax expert. There are some options as far as like your property taxes. You can reduce property taxes, or you can, kind of defer them for a little bit, transfer them to a replacement home. But again, let's bring in your CPA for this conversation. Just having your sort of team set up so everyone can help during a disaster. Um, okay, and then the to go bag. Can we talk about the to go bag? What is that like? Do you literally have a bag already packed, or do you just kind of have like the items in your head that you would need to grab?
I have one of those clear plastic containers with a handle that you can put
Mhm.
file folders in.
Yeah,
And I have my estate plan in there, and I've got my passports in there, and my kids' birth certificates. And it's not, it's not stored right next to the door, although I'll be honest, it is right now because of what we've been through in the last month. But it is all together in one big container. One of the things I think is important is to kind of think through those are the decisions I made to put in there because of sort of how long it can take to replace certain things,
mhm.
in certain documents, and some that may be handier than others. I don't know if you want to go through kind of those items of what is helpful to bring in the to go bag. I know you have a to go bag as well.
I do. I have a binder for my family, and it has our passports in this sleeve here, and then we have our, what is this? This is a birth certificate for one kid, and then another kid has another full side here, Social Security cards, more birth certificates. We have, our marriage license in here also. I even have a tab for my dog, so it has her vaccines and license registration. So it has kind of all of our important documents in it. And ours typically lives on our bookshelf. And so my husband knows that if something's going on, grab the binder because it has everything in there that we already need. Ours even, I think, has our kids' vaccine records, just because that's where we keep everything is just in one spot. And I found it really handy even when, even if we don't have an emergency, just being able to tell my husband, yeah, you know where the passports are. Like, go ahead and grab them if we're booking a trip or whatever it might be, just to have everything in one spot. And I've actually done this. I did this before the fires just to be organized. It's nice just to have everything in one spot. And when you're in an emergency, I think the last thing you want to do is run around trying to find everything. It's
Mhm.
going to be impossible. But along with the binder that we have, I also have our estate planning documents as well. So we have our
Thank you.
trust and wills and all of that kind of in here. So these two things live next to each other on the bookshelf. So if something were to happen, we can grab it and go. Hopefully we won't need it, but I guess it's better to have it than not be prepared for it. Are there only other question like right now that I kind of want to talk to you about? What were those documents, right? And we'll
Yeah.
have like a little image that we can share about like how long it takes to replace the items that may have gone missing, right? Like most things can be replaced. There's very few things as far as like important documents goes that you can't replace either immediately or within a couple weeks, correct?
Yeah. Um, Generally, what can be really important in the short term, and I think of this as partly this came up a lot of times with the evacuation zones as having some kind of photo ID that has your address on it. So that can be really important, especially when streets are closed down only to residents. So that
Mhm.
means you've got to prove where you live. Um, so that's just kind of from the like, if you need to pick one thing to take with you, that would be super helpful. But I actually did want to talk through sort of how these things, like all of the documents that kind of people think about and how long it takes to replace them, because that also is the cost benefit of running around your house and looking for where they are. In terms of your photo ID, the driver's license and state IDs, those usually take 3 to 4 weeks. You've got to get into the DMV, and we know how lovely that can be. So that's always fun. Passports usually take 4 to 6 weeks. That can be a fairly simple process for adults who are renewing essentially what a lost passport. If it involves a minor, then that's got to happen in person, and so that can take a little bit longer because you've got to schedule the appointment. And then usually the website has updates on how long waiting periods are going to be. So a couple of years ago, after COVID died down, there were really long wait times for
Mhm. Mhm.
passports. In this time, I believe it's around 4 to 6 weeks at the moment. In terms of social security cards, those usually take maybe 2 weeks. Two, I would say 14 business days, 10 to 14 business days is usually how long those take. Birth certificates can take 4 to 6 weeks. And if your question is like, when am I going to need these documents? Then you might not. You might not immediately, but at some point they may come in handy to have. You don't need to run off and do all of this all at one time. But some of it may become more, pressing than others, especially if you are going through insurance processes and what documentation, an insurance company may require. Marriage certificates, divorce pronouncements, those can sometimes take 2 to 20 business days. Related to that, if you are in the middle of a divorce proceeding, any kind of court order and things like that, those are usually retrievable online. It's not free, but they are usually easily accessible. And the same thing with deeds is that deeds, people kind of forget this and, will put their deed in their safe deposit box. But the deed is public information. So you really can access your deeds pretty immediately online, or the recorder's office, the Los Angeles recorder's office. Is allowing everybody to access deeds if they were impacted by the fires at no cost at the moment too. So that's fairly easy. The things that take a little bit longer are going to be anything like a will and trust and a power of attorney, because even though your copies may work for what you need in the short term, it's probably best to execute something in the long term, and that's going to depend on the availability of the attorney. Credit cards, if you need to replace your credit cards, usually it's fairly easy to go online and freeze your credit.
Mhm.
But you want to go on and get your new credit cards. That's going to take 4 to 10 business days. And then kind of all the other like investment accounts, as you know, it's all most of those things are available online, assuming you've set up online accounts. And so I know for some people in the older generation, that can be a little bit more complicated if they're used to just having paper versions of everything. So
Sure. That makes sense.
that's sort of your really boring overview of timeframes.
But it's good to know, right? Like, do you think about how long it's gonna take to get a new credit card? Like, if your credit card's not available and you use it every day, like, that's an important
Yeah.
to information to have. And then kind of what you were saying and, on the lines of, like, insurance claims and that stuff. One kind of advice or one tip that I recently heard was that you should be taking a video of your home every
Mm.
6 months, like every room, every drawer. That way you have a video documentation of what you have in there because I know trying to like itemize it in your brain when you're trying to recover from a disaster is exhausting. So either doing that every 6 months. I heard also someone say like every time you replace the batteries in your smoke detector, take a video of the inside of your home too. That way, if you get new things, you can, update the video also. But rather than trying to have to rack your brain about what was in, every room, can be really, really challenging.
It's also
Um,
an easier insurance claim if you've got video or
mm,
photographic evidence. It doesn't even have to be a video if it can be a photograph. And the photographs not just of oh, here is my sweater drawer, but also like your utensils, your cooking stuff, your all the things that you think of as like, oh yeah, but nobody, I don't want anybody to see in that drawer. Like, do it because you may want to replace your garlic press, and
sure.
nobody, if the insurance company doesn't believe you had one, then you might not. It's sort of a silly example, but yes, definitely take photos and videos.
Um, well, this was a lot of information. I think we went over a lot of different um, technique or not even techniques, but ideas and things that can be done to help just be a little bit more prepared. I know we do have a couple questions. So one question was, what percentage of your income should you be spending on insurance? I think they mean like homeowners insurance or flood insurance, that kind of stuff. It's a little tricky because I think your property is going to depend, the type of insurance you have is going to depend on also the type of property you have. And insurance in different places could cost more money. So I guess as a general rule of thumb, what we recommend to clients is that you spend no more than 30% of your gross income on all housing expenses. So that is your rent, your mortgage, your taxes, your insurance, your utilities. So you really kind of need to add all that up and see, make sure that that kind of fits within your budget because you don't want to be spending more than 30% of your gross income on all housing expenses, and insurance falls into that category. Um, and then another question that I think we kind of addressed it, but does it ever make sense to self-insure? I think we talked about how you really need a lot of liquid assets to be able to self-insure. And I have an example here that if the average home cost, I think we said it was $300 to $600 a square foot to rebuild. Let's just go with the high number. Let's say it's 600. Um, Natasha, any idea what like the average square foot is of a home in
I think
LA?
I have read that it's around 3,000 square feet.
Yeah, I think I saw that. I think I saw that too. Okay, so let's say, $600 a square foot, 3,000 square feet, it's gonna cost you 1.8 to rebuild. So if you think about that, if you just need, 1.8 to rebuild, that would be your insurance that you have to have saved just separately. So that's why it's so tricky to self-insure because $1.8 million is a lot of money to have, especially when you're probably spending, that, if not more, on the home that you're purchasing just, kind of to begin with. Um, and then, what happens if I'm considered uninsurable? What should I do? One great tip that I got was that you can rent. If it's not affordable, if you're not able to self-insure, then sure, then you just rent. Or you can self-insure like we talked about, but that really is for people who are, really financially stable and have a lot of liquid assets. But there's nothing wrong with renting, right? The people who lost homes and things when they were renting, it's a little bit easier to walk away. It does become the homeowner's problem. maybe not the answer you want because I know owning a home in LA is a big goal for everybody. But if it's just impossible to do it or unaffordable, then renting is a good way to kind of, live in the area that you want to without having to sacrifice all of your finances. Um, I think that's it. Natasha, did you have anything else you wanted to add or any questions come your way? Okay.
I didn't see any other questions come in. I'm sorry that they were all for you. Um, but I know that I guess the one thing I would want to say is that I know this is a lot of information and I know it can be really overwhelming. And part of the reason why Kaytlin and I wanted to speak is because we want to make sure that people know that they can reach out to their professionals to help them. That's what we're here
Mhm.
for. It's a really challenging thing, and sometimes you don't know the right thing to do. And sometimes we don't know the right thing to do, but it can help to talk it through, and we understand some more industry specific things. So that can be really helpful.
Yeah.
So I'm grateful for you sharing all that information because it is a lot, and um, I appreciate it.
Well, yeah, thanks for joining us. I mean, that's why we were able to work together, and it's really nice to have, your team of professionals, right? So, I'm glad you're on my team too, for the estate planning side of things. And I guess I'll can just kind of close it off by saying, thank you for coming. I'm glad we had the questions, and I know LA is strong. It's our home. It will, we'll be okay. We'll rebuild, but we'll just keep kind of everyone in our thoughts right now as everyone goes through, or a lot of people go through this really challenging time. But sending lots of love.